remember to stick around after the end of the sermon because we're going to be taking your comments and questions in the chat room. On this monthly program, we're going to be following the tradition of the late Ronald L. Dart, who loved 2 o'clock church and who loved having question and answers after the sermon. So please participate with us in the chat room after we finish the sermon. And also remember that Start Our Sabbath, our Friday night show, will not be back on the air this coming Friday evening. We'll be back on May 3rd. One other thing we want to mention to you is that we don't accept donations at the Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association. Everything we do this for free. So please don't send us any money. We don't ask for your money. And if you do send it, we're going to send it back to you because that's been our policy from the very, very beginning. But if you think that this monthly sermon has value, please hit the share button on Facebook, or if you're watching on YouTube, hit the YouTube link and share it with other people. But again, no pressure on this. We're not here to shame you. If you don't want to share it, that's fine, no problem, whatever you feel comfortable with. All right, I'm going to look at the technical crew and ask them, shall we start? Are we ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, everything's good? All right, let's open with prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this opportunity that we have to keep the Sabbath together electronically. This show that is for shut-ins and people who have no place to go is an opportunity for those who are kind of stuck in the house, can't go anywhere, to celebrate the Sabbath and listen to God's Word being preached. We thank you for this. We thank you that the technology exists so that we can do this. And we thank you that we have the means at the Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association to pull this off and to do this. So please put your blessing on everything that's said and done this afternoon on this Sabbath day as we give this sermon. So Father, we thank you for those who are joining us who might have already gone to church and now they're back home and watching. Please be with all of us who are here. We give you praise and thanks for all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, let's start the sermon. One day, a Jewish rabbi and a Catholic priest were having a heated debate over theology, and each obviously felt that the other guy had made a wrong decision when it came to religion. After a while, the Catholic priest got so exasperated with the rabbi that he said to him, he said, "Rabbi, what's going to happen to you when you get to heaven?" He said, "You're not going to be met at the pearly gates by Moses. You're going to see St. Peter standing there." Well, the old rabbi, he thought for a moment and he said, okay. He said, "If I am met by St. Peter, I will say, I guess I gave up lobster for nothing. But when you get to the pearly gates, good Father," he said, "if you are met by Moses instead of St. Peter, you will have to say, I gave up women for nothing. And which is worse?" Religion is a choice. And not that many people in the world are rightly worshiping in spirit and in truth by obeying God regarding His law and His way of life. And all of us Christians who have made our choice, we acknowledge that our eternal salvation rests on the fact that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Our eternal life premise is that if Jesus is not the Savior of mankind, then we're all lost. I mean, let's be honest. We've got some really cool doctrines that we Sabbath keepers believe in, like the Sabbath and the law, the commandments, clean and unclean, all these things. But if we don't really believe that this first century Messiah was genuine, then none of our fascinating doctrines matter in the slightest. We can throw them all away because without Jesus, our faith is meaningless. And here's why we say this. Contrary to what the scholars and historians would have us believe, Jesus is not just another founder of some religion. Today, it's politically correct in the world of academia to say that Jesus is not really any better than other men who have founded religious ways of life. Many scholars and historians would have us believe that if you've seen one founder of a religion, you've seen them all. They're all the same, according to them. But we, in the ecclesia, we know different because the uniqueness of Jesus makes him stand apart totally and completely from the founders of the other religions that we see throughout history. So today, brethren, I'd like for us to look at Jesus in a little bit different way this afternoon. I'd like to discuss the historical perspective of Jesus so that we can clearly see how this first century Messiah affects his followers today, even 2,000 years after his death and resurrection. Now, let's start by understanding the following. The problem with modern scholars and historians is that they try to appear really magnanimous in their treatment of Jesus. And when they do this, they patronize us. They condescend to us because they feel that we Christians are limited in our collective faith-based intelligence. And what they do is they place all religions on a table for the world to see. And they say about Jesus the exact same thing that they say about all the other founders of religion. They say that Jesus was a good and wise teacher, but just like Mohammed, just like Buddha, just like Confucius, they say Jesus certainly wasn't God. Now, we run into a problem with that assumption when it comes to Jesus of Nazareth. And before we look at this problem in detail, let's first understand the difference between two concepts, a continuum versus either or. There's a continuum and there's either or. See that? A continuum is a line with an infinite number of points on the line. Okay? A continuum represents infinite degrees. Now, on this line that I've just drawn, if someone were to ask me how many points are on that line, the answer would be, we can't count all the points on that line because there are an infinite number of points on a line. Any line, no matter how short, no matter how long the line is, it has infinite points, number of points on it. An example of a continuum would be my performance as an employee at a company where I work. You can measure my performance on a continuum. I can be an excellent employee way over here, or I can be a very bad employee way over here, or I can be any number of places in between in these two extreme evaluations. When rating a movie, it's the same thing. It's either very good, or it's very bad, or it's any number of places in between. That's a continuum. But then we have the concept of either or. Either or is not the same as a continuum. For example, you can ask the question, you can say, is that woman, any woman you point to, is she pregnant? Either she's pregnant or she isn't. There's no in between. There's no continuum. There's no evaluation. There's no rating. There's no such thing as being partially pregnant. Either a woman is pregnant or she isn't. It's either or. Another example of either or is whether or not a person is Christian. Either a person is a Christian or he isn't. It's either yes or no. There's no in between, as the scholars would have us believe. Now, when the scholars want to evaluate Jesus, they don't want the discussion to get into any kind of an either or. They don't like that. Instead, they want to put Jesus on a continuum where it's either good at one end or good at the other. And then they say, if you want to believe most things about Jesus, you put him on that end of the continuum. But if you want to believe just a few things about Jesus, you put him on this end of the continuum. And they say that your opinion of Jesus determines where you put him on that continuum. And here's where the problem hits us right smack in the face. When you evaluate the life of Jesus of Nazareth, there are four sources and four sources alone that you can go to. You can't go to the apocryphal Gospels because they're not reliable. You can't go to the writings of Josephus about Jesus because what's in Josephus' account was probably a forged insertion. So, if you want to learn about Jesus, you have to go to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Nowhere else. And here's the kicker. If you use those four sources as, those four Gospels as your sources, you find Jesus making statements about himself that preclude his being good and wise unless he is God. Let me say that again. This is important. If you read what Jesus says about himself in the Gospels, he can't be good and wise unless he is God. All right, let's demonstrate this by asking a question. Where did the other founders of religion get their authority? Well, Muhammad had these visions. His authority was based on those visions. Buddha had an experience which he offered to his disciples, and he told them that if they followed his way, they'd achieve this ultimate happiness. Confucius claimed to be a mere transmitter of a process whereby man could find happiness by better internalizing older classical works. Jesus, on the other hand, ceded absolute authority in himself. He said things like this, "You have heard it said such and such, but I say," and then he would go on to expound his point. An example of this was when we read that the Old Testament prophets would say things like this. They'd say, "May the Lord rebuke you," or "May the Lord forgive you." But Jesus said, "I forgive you." Now, back in the day, when Ron Dart was alive, and if he would invite somebody to come over to preach at his organization, he asked a guy to get up and preach on the Sabbath. He typically gave us a lot of latitude on what we could say. And the quickest way a guy could lose that latitude would be if he had gotten up there and said, "All authority in heaven and earth is given unto me. If you build upon what I say, you build upon a rock. If you build upon what others say, you build on sand." We don't respect and exalt people who place such authority in themselves. We ask them, we say, "By what basis do you claim this authority?" Jesus placed it in himself, praise God. Another problem we have with Jesus is that he said he was perfect. Now, no mortal man can ever be respected for making the claims that Jesus made about himself. And notice I said no mortal man. One theologian said this. He said, "The greatest asset of mortal man is the repentance of sin, and the greatest sin is to be conscious of none." And that statement is a truism, because we don't like people who have no awareness that they make mistakes. Of those people who are the most repugnant is the person who thinks he's never wrong. Don't those kind of people drive you up the wall? We make saints out of people who are aware of their faults and admit them. But let's notice what Jesus did in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. Matthew 5:27. He defines the law as something from which nobody can escape. He says this, he says, "You have heard that it was said by them of old time, you shall not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart." Jesus is saying you don't have to do it. He says, just think it, and you're guilty. And what does that do? It convicts everybody. But then notice what he had just said before in verse 17. He said, "I've not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it." Jesus is saying here, if you want perfection, here it is. You're looking at it. Jesus carried with him a sense of moral perfection. Now, here's where it gets fun. The scholars and the historians are going to say to us at this point, they say, "Aha, okay, we got you. Doesn't Jesus say in the Bible, 'Don't call me good'?" They go, "Aha, gotcha." Well, let's look at that verse. Let's look at Matthew 19, verse 16. Matthew chapter 19, verse 16. It says, "And behold, one came and said unto him, 'Good master, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life?' And Jesus said unto him, 'Why do you call me good? There is none good but one, that is God.'" Now, people are always bringing this up, this scripture, as quote-unquote proof that Jesus was not perfect. But in the scripture, he's not admitting imperfection. He's not admitting it. This scripture states the exact opposite. This scripture says that Jesus was indeed perfect. It's just muddled by the King James that I just read. Okay? Because the King James didn't translate this right. And I just goofed up the script by hitting something. Hold on. Bear with me while I get the script back where it's supposed to be. Okay. When Jesus uttered these words in Matthew, he did not say that I'm not perfect. What he's doing is he's claiming that he was perfect. And let me explain this. Okay? And we're going to get there in just a second. We just had a technical glitch, and we'll get to it in just a second. All right. The Living Bible in this verse says, when you call me good, you're calling me God, for God alone is truly good. So Jesus is saying, if you're going to call me good, then recognize that I'm also God, because only God can be good. In this verse, Jesus was not admitting fallibility, he was claiming perfection. Now, Jesus was the only founder of religion who did not himself pray the model prayer that he gave to his followers. Now we know, or most of us out here know, that the so-called Lord's Prayer is not the Lord's Prayer. What the world calls the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6 is actually the disciples' prayer. This disciples' prayer in Matthew 6, in it, Jesus teaches his disciples how to pray. He says here in Matthew 6, he says, pray like this, guys. Forgive us our trespasses. Forgive us our trespasses. That's what Jesus tells us to pray. Jesus never prayed that prayer. Jesus never had to ask for forgiveness for sin because he never sinned. We find Jesus' prayer in John 17. We read it every year at the Lord's Supper Passover, where Jesus said, Father, I have glorified you. And this prayer in John 17 exudes the absolute presumptive self-confidence of perfection, and no other religious leader ever dared to have that quality about him. We're not done. There's more. Jesus also set himself up as having an inside view of eternity. Remember how he drove the Pharisees nuts in John 56:68. John chapter 56, verse 68, when he said, I existed before Abraham. Remember that? And what happened? Did they laugh at him? No, they went into a rage. And you can just imagine hearing the Pharisees go crazy with this. And they said to him, they said, you're not even 50 years old, and you're saying that you were around 3,000 years ago when Abraham lived? And Jesus says, 3,000 years ago? No. How about 3 million years ago? Jesus says, you heard about Satan being cast out of heaven? I was there, and I'm older than that. Jesus talked about heaven and the eternal world the same way that I talk about my home in Big Sandy, Texas. Jesus made it clear that he was always there, and that his existence in Palestine 2,000 years ago was just a temporary thing. And guess what? We don't make saints and heroes out of people who talk like that. We lock them up in the nut house. Jesus said, I am the light, you follow me. I'm the bread, you eat of me. I'm the water, you drink of me. I'm the door, you get in through me. I'm the rock, you build on me. He said, there's no other way but me. You've got to make me your master and nobody else. What other founder of religion dared to take such a stand? Now, Christianity is a cold turkey religion. What? Christianity, cold turkey religion. By that we mean there's no middle ground. Our faith is either this or that with no in between. It's either or. There is no continuum when it comes to accepting Jesus. Either Jesus was a fraud and a nut and a whack job, or he was God. And there's nothing in between, as the scholars and the historians would have us believe. And you know, here's what's cool about this. It's not just the agnostic scholars and historians who have problems understanding Jesus and what he was. A lot of churches out there don't seem to have a grasp on who Jesus was either. A Dallas Morning News article not too long ago described the problems that were going on in the Presbyterian church that they were having with Jesus. And the article says this, quote, the nation's largest Presbyterian denomination wrestled Thursday with what used to be a no-brainer for Christians. Is Jesus the only way to salvation? The General Assembly struck down a proposal that said Jesus is the one vehicle of salvation. You get that? Somebody put a proposal on the table for the General Assembly that said Jesus is the one vehicle for salvation, and the General Assembly struck it down. Still quoting, the article says, And one of the delegates was astounded at the very idea that there could be any other vehicle for salvation other than Jesus. So he asked, he said, if salvation is plural, who are all the other deities that we're talking about? End quote. Isn't that a great question? That's a great question. Another delegate, though, he said on the other side of the issue, he said, I don't have the right to say that other people can't find God in their other ways. Other ways than Jesus. And I'm telling you, this is nonsense. Complete nonsense. And because this nonsense is talked about in many churches, this is kind of common in a lot of churches. When I talk to my friends in other churches, I tell them, I say, look, I'm sorry if you're offended by this statement, but there is only one way to eternal life. I say, with apologies to Plato, with apologies to some Egyptian writing on a papyrus while watching a pyramid being built, with apologies to some of the churches you find out there, you can find eternal life only through Jesus. There's no other way. All other roads lead to eternal death. Now, Jesus' resurrection is what makes Christianity totally different from other religions. Jesus' resurrection is what makes this middle ground view of Jesus an impossibility. As followers of Jesus, we can either believe or disbelieve that he rose from the dead just as he said he would. But if we don't believe in his resurrection, we might as well all go home from church, lock the doors of the church building where you assemble on the Sabbath, and never come back, because if that's the case, our religion doesn't matter anymore if we don't believe that he was resurrected. And again, here's where the scholars and the historians think they have us. They say this, what proof is there that Jesus really rose from the grave after 3 days and 3 nights? Now, when I was a boy in a Protestant church, I was taught to answer this question by saying, because he lives in my heart. And it's a good answer. But there's much more to it than that. We know that Jesus lives because, as intelligent, thinking people, our logic dictates there is no other answer. Logic? Intelligence? Some people say that this is absolutely no way to describe our faith in Jesus. But I'm telling you, it is. We can use words like logic and intelligence and proof when describing our faith. Proof of Jesus' resurrection starts not only with the eyewitness accounts mentioned by Peter in the book of Acts and by Paul in his writings, but it goes further than that. And here's where we come to another one of those either-or crossroads that we've been talking about. Because either the apostles were liars or they were honest reporters telling us the truth when they reported Jesus' resurrection. There's no in-between. This is either-or. And now, in fairness to the scholars and historians, let's look at their 5 main arguments as to why they believe there was no resurrection of Jesus after 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. 5 reasons. First, the scholars and historians say that the Romans could have taken Jesus' body out of the tomb and hidden it. And they could say this is the reason why when Jesus' followers went to the tomb after 3 days and 3 nights, his body was gone. You got that? Let that sink in just a little bit. Now, I've got a brother-in-law up in Oklahoma. He's a good old boy. Lives in the backwoods of Pushmataha County. So, a few hours north of where we are in Big Sandy. And he likes to use the phrase, educated idiot. And let's be clear. We in God's church are not anti-scholarship. We're not anti-research. We're not anti-science. We know the value of scholarship and research and science. Education is a great thing. But I've got to admit that my backwoods brother-in-law is correct when he says that there are people in this world who have college degrees, but they don't have enough sense to pour rain out of a boot. Actually, he uses another word for rain. All right, let's get serious. Why in the world would the Romans want to steal the body of Jesus? And suppose they made a mistake and they stole it. Then, this absence of a body, the absence of the corpse, and it causes all these people to wrongly believe he was resurrected, if that's the case, then after this crazy religion takes hold based on an absent corpse, why didn't the Romans simply produce the body and prove once and for all that Jesus was a hoax? Come on. This act of producing Jesus' dead body a week or two after his death would have immediately destroyed Christianity in its infancy. So explanation number one is not valid at all. Well, let's go to the second possible explanation that the atheistic and agnostic scholars and historians say why Jesus was not resurrected after 3 days and 3 nights. They say the Pharisees could have taken the body of Jesus from the tomb. Our response to that, what do we Christians say? We say, well, it's the same as number one. Well, the Romans might have taken the body. Well, first of all, why would the Pharisees take it? And then if they did make this mistake in the beginning of taking it, why didn't they just later produce it and show Jesus to be a fraud? So reason number two doesn't work. Their third possible reason from the atheist and agnostic scholars and historians, they say that the disciples were suffering hallucinations and only thought that they saw the resurrected Christ. Again, forgive me for being overly redundant, but if this is true, then the authorities only had to produce the body of Jesus and it would have destroyed the whole game. So we're getting through these 5 reasons real quickly. We're already on number 4. Their fourth possible explanation is this. They say the disciples could have taken the body. Now we're getting somewhere. Maybe the disciples were charlatans from the beginning. Maybe they were a bunch of flim-flam men. That would explain a lot, wouldn't it? But it wouldn't explain the following. After Pentecost, there was great change among the disciples. Peter, who had been the epitome of instability, he becomes a rock after Pentecost. John, who had been a son of thunder, remember how he wanted to bring fire and brimstone on that one village? He wanted the best seat in the house. He has his mother go to Jesus and whine and say, I want my 2 sons to sit with you on your kingdom, one on the left and one on the right. Big mama's boy. Even in spite of all that, after Pentecost, John becomes the epitome of love. And you can't read the Gospel of John or the epistles of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John without just feeling the love coming through. Thomas, who had doubted everything with such a negative attitude. John chapter 11 shows how he was so depressed after the death of Jesus, he said, I wish I were dead too. Thomas was so cynical that he had to actually put his fingers in the side of Christ in order to believe in the resurrection. Well, tradition says that Thomas held up in the faith even to being slaughtered in India for preaching the gospel. Previously, these guys had been a bunch of whiners and crybabies. But then after Pentecost, we see them transformed into men of power and strength and resolve. Another explanation why number 4 can't be correct, where it's claimed that the disciples were hoaxers, is a really simple principle. And anybody who's ever worked with law enforcement or worked with people who were criminal, juvenile delinquents, they understand this. Nobody suffers persecution for a lie. Nobody suffers persecution for a lie. After Jesus' death, we see the disciples continually tortured and slaughtered like animals in a butcher shop. John was the only exception, but the rest of them died for what they believed. And anybody who knows anything about human nature will tell you that nobody is going to suffer such persecution for a lie. Another reason that it can't be claimed that the disciples were hoaxers is that as the years went by, each one of them was alone and he still stuck to his story. And we know that they were scattered all over the civilized world with virtually no communication with each other. They had no phones, no email, no text messaging, no air satellite phones, nothing. Almost nothing. Just a little bit of written communication. After 45 AD, each one of these guys didn't even know who was and who wasn't still alive of the original group. And each man found himself in a position at the time of his death where all he had to do was say this: time out, time out. Wait a minute, folks, it was all a trick. If he said this, he'd go free. None of his friends from the old days would know. I mean, they might be dead by then too. Or maybe they had recanted. And we can understand the concept of group hysteria in the Colosseum where someone's about to die with a bunch of other people. In such an environment, each individual has a tendency to reinforce his peers in a spiraling wave of hysterical self-justification. These things have been studied, been documented. It happens, no doubt about it. But there was no group hysteria among the disciples when they died. Each guy was alone. Each guy did not recant. And if this were a hoax, one of those liars had to break. Again, go to law enforcement people. They'll tell you conspiracies almost always have a rat. You give a guy immunity, and he's going to rat out on all the other guys. In the Watergate conspiracy, we saw just about everyone turning evidence for the federal government and ratting out his co-conspirators. We see the same thing going on in Washington today. This is how conspiracies go. People rat on each other because they're given immunity. If the resurrection 2,000 years ago was a conspiracy, it was the most successful conspiracy in the history of man. All right, let's get to our final and fifth argument against Jesus' resurrection, and this argument is proposed by the atheistic and agnostic scholars and historians. They tell you that the New Testament is not a reliable source of historical information. Proponents of this view start with a premise. Now stay with me. Please stay with me, because I'm going to give you their premise, and then I'm going to take you, through where their logic takes them after that based on their premise. So please stay with me. Concentrate, okay? Their premise is that the prophet Ezra, remember him from the Old Testament? They say that the prophet Ezra not only had the authority to modify the Old Testament, supposedly to make it more readable for the Jews, but that he actually did modify the Old Testament. Did you get that? That's their premise. Ezra monkeyed with the New Testament. I got to get going. We're running out of time. Then, these same people who come up with that contention, they then reason that the Catholic Church fathers, who they say set the New Testament canon, they say that the Catholic Church fathers then used Ezra's actions as justification in their actions to modify the New Testament. And they say that's why the New Testament is all messed up and totally unreliable for us today. Now, you get all that? Hold all that together, okay? There's several major problems with this whole line of reasoning where they say that Ezra tampered with the Old Testament and that his tampering of the Old Testament then inspired the Catholic Church to tamper with the New Testament. Here are the problems with this. Number one, there is nothing in Scripture that gives Ezra the right to change words that were written by prophets such as Moses, Samuel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And even if Ezra was descended from Aaron, which he was, and served as a prophet, which he did, there's absolutely nothing in Scripture that says he had the authority to change the words that were written by Moses and Samuel and Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and all the other prophets. Number two, there's nothing in Scripture or history that gives any indication whatsoever that Ezra made any modifications to the Old Testament text. Yes, the Jews have a tradition that Ezra set the final Old Testament canon. That's their tradition, but that proves nothing. And the last few paragraphs in the Torah regarding Moses' death obviously weren't written by Moses. We don't think they were. They just might have been added by Ezra. A lot of people think that they were. But again, this is in no way proof that Ezra monkeyed with the Old Testament scriptures to quote-unquote make them more readable for the Jews. This is absurd. Number three, the Catholic Church did not set the New Testament canon, nor was the Catholic Church the entity that determined which books would be in the New Testament. Whoa, and I know this is probably going to blow the minds of a lot of people out there because you believe that. If there's anything that you can get from this message today, I hope it's this. The Catholic Church did not set the New Testament canon. The only thing the Catholic Church did was this. They simply put their stamp of approval on the texts that were already established by the churches of God that existed at that time in Asia Minor. And none of these churches of God that did the actual assembly of the New Testament books were under any authority of Rome when they pulled the collection together that we call the New Testament canon. Does that blow your mind? It may, but it's a fact. All right, number 4. If the Catholic Church were going to change the texts of the New Testament, I'm telling you they would have done a much better job of changing the New Testament to make it agree with their doctrines. Their doctrines such as the immortality of the soul, the Trinity, the authority of the Bishop of Rome. But they didn't. And we know that there's nothing in the New Testament to back up these Catholic teachings regarding the immortality of the soul, the Trinity, or the authority of the Bishop of Rome. The truth of the matter is that the Catholic Church could not and did not tamper with the New Testament scriptures because these texts were already set in canon as the accepted writings of all Christendom long before the church at Rome gave their stamp of approval. Can you understand that? You don't have to agree with it, but understand it so that you can check this out for yourself and determine whether or not that's an accurate statement. Start with the understanding of what I'm saying and then research it and see if it's true or not. It's true. So this whole line of fractured logic that they use to discredit the validity of the New Testament is totally bogus. This whole discussion that we're having today can only bring us to one conclusion. Sure, it's fine to believe in Jesus because we feel it in our hearts. That's fine. But there's so much more to this. Our understanding of the things that we've just gone over leave us with only one possibility regarding Jesus. Jesus is God, and his disciples were genuine when they preached him after Pentecost. Further, logic dictates that Jesus rose from the dead after 3 days and 3 nights. He ascended to heaven to be at the right hand of the Father, and that he is our King and Savior today. No other approach makes any sense. In the ecclesia, we worship Jesus with all of our hearts, our souls, and our minds. We believe in him. We obey him. And we look forward to the day he returns. Oh, do we look forward to the day when he returns to straighten out the mess which man has made on the earth. Now, let me do a little supposed thing here, a little hypothetical. Suppose you were to be given the date of Jesus' return, which you're not going to get. No man knows the hour of the day. Suppose you somehow found out that Jesus' return was going to be like a year from now, or 3 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever. Suppose you could figure out the exact date, and suppose you were given the power to postpone that date. How many people today that you know would postpone the date of Jesus' return by several years or months or days or even hours? As a Christian, you should never want Jesus' return postponed at all. We want his return to be now, don't we? We want it ASAP. But not that everybody in the Sabbath-keeping churches of God agree with this. Some who claim to be ministers of God's church, if they could, they would postpone the very return of Christ if they could. And I don't get it. Over the decades, I've heard so many ministers say they want more time. In other words, they want the return of Jesus postponed. I've seen this. Some guy will get elected, and a whole lot of ministers will say, oh, good. This guy got elected, and that means we're going to have more time. Who wants more time? Do you want more time? I don't want more time. Millions and millions of people on this planet are suffering. Why would I want more time for them to suffer? I want Jesus to return as soon as possible. So I will always pray, thy kingdom come. I will never pray, give us more time. Let's conclude this by getting back to our rabbi and our priest. Okay? They were having this debate about eternal life. We know in the ecclesia that unlike the rabbi and the priest in our opening story who talked about regrets, the kingdom of God will see no regret from us that we accepted Jesus as our Savior. Our faith is rock solid. Our choice to obey him and emulate him is the right choice. And it's the only logical choice. So, let's continue to worship God in spirit and in truth. Let's always keep our eyes on the prize, and let's pray every day, thy kingdom come. Now, before we do the closer, before we go into the chat room, remember, don't go away, because we still got a lot to talk about. We want to hear what you have to say. Before we go, I want to put in a plug for a great sermon by Ron Dart that ties in with this message. The sermon by Ron Dart is called Basic Christianity. You can find it at rldea.com. And you can go to the button at rldea.com that says Turn the Page. This message is not in the regular audio messages tab. It's in the Turn the Page tab. Or if you don't even have to go to rldea.com and look for it. Whether you're watching this message on Facebook or YouTube, Carl and Nancy have put the link to this message in the comments section of the chat room, whatever you call it. You can just click onto it and go directly into Ron's message, Basic Christianity. It's a great message. I suggest that you check it out. This link will take you right to it, by Ronald L. Dart, Basic Christianity. I think that's all I have. Nancy, let's give us some closing music, and then we're going to bring some chairs in, and we're going to have we're going to check out your comments, see what you have to say. Don't go away. We're just getting started here. This is a great Sabbath day.
Once again, we thank you for joining us on our program, Remember the Sabbath. Please don't leave, because we want to hear your comments and questions in our live chat room conversation. And if you found this message to be helpful, we ask that you forward it to your friends and relatives. At the Ronald L. Dart Evangelistic Association, we never accept money from the public, but we do ask for your prayers and that you help us to share our messages. Please don't forget to check out all the material we have at rldea.com. Once again, Wes and Nancy White.
Okay, we're here. We're ready to do this thing. Hey, we've got a nice crowd out there today. This is nice. A little more than I expected. I didn't expect so many of you to be here. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, Nancy's going to pull in a chair. Let me help you with that, sweetheart. And let me lift it up over there. This is all live TV, and this is what happens with live TV. If this weren't live TV, we would cut and paste and edit
That's
out all
right.
the problems.
We just get over here and I'd be here, right?
Yeah, and it would be like magic.
Okay, so let me start with, oh, this is going to be pretty hot. Let me
Okay.
move that to the other side. You know I talk way louder than you.
Yes.
And if it's in the shot, then I'll take care of it.
Yeah. You'll edit it out, right?
No, I mean, I'll move it.
Why don't you back up just a little if you can, or can't you? Because you.
Yes, I can put this on my lap.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with the YouTube room, and we'll read some things that were said while you were giving your sermon, okay?
Okay, what do you got?
All right, so everybody seems to agree with you, of course, but let's see, Paul Shaw said, why are you, he said to him, why are you asking me about good? There is one who is good, Matthew 19:16 through 17, Jewish New Testament. And you actually covered that. I don't think Paul was there, but will you reiterate your point about that scripture when Jesus said, why do you call me good? None is good but one.
Okay.
Just repeat what you said.
Okay, very quickly. And Paul, you can go back and get a better version of this because now I'm speaking off the top, off the cuff. The bottom line is that in the King James it's muddled and it's a bad translation. And what Jesus is actually saying, why do you call me good? When you call me good, you're calling me God because only God can be good. That's what Jesus is saying there. He's not saying only God the Father is good, and since I'm God the Father, I'm not good. That's not what Jesus is saying. And again, many people are confused because the most popular translation in English for several centuries, many centuries, has been the King James Version, and the King James Version really botches it. And again, I hope that nobody out there is offended when I say the King James Version is not perfect. The King James Version has some problems. And if you don't believe me, go to your King James. The most egregious and obvious example of the King James not being perfect is Acts 12:4, where it talks about Easter. And if you look it up in a concordance, you'll find that that word for Easter in Acts 12:4 is Pascha. And Pascha can never mean the name of a pagan goddess. Pascha can only mean Passover. So the King James is not perfect, and they blew it on this scripture. And if you go to the other versions of the Bible, you see that Jesus is saying, if you're going to call me good, you're acknowledging that I'm God, because only God can be good.
Okay. Then also, let's see, Paul says, Revelation 22, it says, Amen, Lord Jesus, come. And Carl says, why would anyone in their right mind want Christ's return delayed?
Thank you, Carl. Excellent point. Why would anybody want it to be delayed? You know, and I guess if you're enjoying this life so much that you can say, I can do this for another 3, 5, 10 years. Good for you, you know. And let's be frank. Nancy and I, we live a pretty good life. We're not hungry. We got a warm place to sleep at night. I just bought a brand new van. We got a lot of friends. We have lots of fun. We do a lot of traveling. We could live like this for another 3, 5, 10 years. Still got our health. But I'm not going to say that, because that's the ultimate in being selfish. There are people all around the world, people in this country, people in Upshur County, Texas, who are suffering. I don't want them to suffer anymore. Sure, I'm having a great time right now. I'm having a ball doing what I do in the various things I'm involved with, Church of God, Seventh Day, RLDEA, Dynamic Christian Ministries, SOS. I'm having a ball. But other people are not. So let's pray, thy kingdom come, because we want Jesus to come and alleviate the suffering. So what did Carl say? Why would anybody want Jesus' return to be delayed? In their right mind. Excellent, excellent way to put it, Carl. Thank you.
Okay, now going to Facebook, I'm going to read a few comments by Richard Maxwell.
Okay.
He said, because the apostles died for the truth, not many would die for a lie, which is a point that you also made. He says, if the disciples took Jesus' body, they would have either had to bribe the Roman guards or take them by force. Yeah. Or take them by force, sorry. Not going to happen either way, because their lives would have been forfeit.
Yes. And when he says they, who does he mean? The Roman guards? The what?
The disciples. The disciples wouldn't have, he was talking about the disciples. If the disciples took Jesus' body, is how he starts. Their lives would have been forfeit by the Roman guards.
Yeah, okay. Oh, by making the attempt.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's more to talk about regarding the Roman guards. We'll get into that in a minute. Go ahead, sweetie, with what else you were going to say.
Okay, Richard also said, once everyone has made a choice between God and Satan, then Christ will return.
Okay.
And then his final statement that I have here about Abraham, and the statement 3,000 years ago, Abraham was after the flood, so it would have been within 2,000 years. So maybe you said 3,000 years? I don't know.
Okay. 3,000 years from our time. Abraham lived 3,000 years ago from our time.
Oh.
Okay. But it wasn't 3,000 years from Jesus' time.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Got it. When we say 3,000, it's 3,000 from now. Because we know that Solomon and David lived around 1,000 BC. That was 3,000 years ago. And then Abraham lived a few hundred years even before then. So it was over 3,000 years ago from our time that we live today that Abraham lived.
Okay. And then Diane Webb says some of those folks should travel to third world countries and then see if they still want more time. Time for what?
Time for what? And Diane knows what she's talking about, because Diane, to show what a good soul she is, she has been to Africa. And she goes there to help the widows and the orphans who are poor. She raises money to help the widows and the orphans in Africa. And if you want to, again, we don't ask for money, RLDEA and DCM, but if you want to help widows and orphans in Africa and you want to find somebody who's trustworthy, you contact Diane Webb. She's in the chat room. You can click onto her Facebook page, get in touch with her and say, how can I help? I've known Diane for years. She and her husband is a disabled war veteran from the Vietnam era. He got blown up in a tank And these are two dedicated, hardworking, serious, unselfish people who know all about suffering in Africa. So that's where she's coming from. And I'm going to take it a step further by saying if you want to donate money to a good cause, to people who are suffering, widows and orphans, that there's no overhead, nothing gets skimmed off for administrative purposes. Every dime that gets sent to Diane for these widows and orphans go to the widows and orphans in Africa. So contact Diane Webb. And again, Diane knows about suffering a lot more than I do. I see poor people in Upshur County, but these people are not suffering in any way, shape, or form at the nearness of the people in Africa. These people are suffering. So
Mimi says we need to have compassion in our thinking about those who are suffering so much. And I believe that was a point you were making. Carl said that he wishes that his return wasn't heralded by suffering of so many.
Yeah.
And I have a suggestion, something I've come up with, or some way that I pray. We all pray. Those of us who want the kingdom to come, which is probably everybody who's paying attention to us today or watching, is I take a page out of Jesus's book. When he knew he had to go through the suffering before his crucifixion, he said to the Father, if this cup can pass, make it pass. If not, nevertheless, your will be done, not mine. And that's how I pray about the tribulation prior to Jesus's return. If this cup can pass, if he can return without the world having to go through this, then please let the cup pass. And if not, usually I say, and this is not necessarily imitating Jesus, I say, okay, then not one single scrape, scratch, or cut beyond what is absolutely necessary. Stop the suffering as little as possible, please. And so if you disagree that that's biblical, you can respond in the chat room. But that's, because when I think about Jesus returning, of course I want him here right now, but I'm with Carl. I know what's coming. I don't want to suffer that. I don't want my neighbors to suffer that. I don't want my family to suffer that. I don't want people I don't even know to suffer that. And there's so much suffering already in the world. Can that be time served for Christ's return? So that's just something that I do.
Yeah, Carl brings up an excellent point, and this has been on my mind for years and years, about there's already enough suffering in the world right now, absolutely. Really, do we have to have more suffering before this great climax when Jesus returns? Well, let me say what my understanding is on that. The suffering that's in the world now is caused by man and Satan. God did not bring the suffering that's in the world. And Ron Dart talked about this. He said, a lot of people want to believe that AIDS is a disease that was inflicted on bad people by God. And Ron Dart says there's no proof of that. There's no indication that that's the case. What it is that God set a bunch of laws into motion. People have been violating those laws by doing things they got no business doing, whether it be drugs or goofy sex or whatever. And as a result of violating those laws, these diseases get created. God did not cause AIDS. God did not cause all the diseases in the world. They're all caused by man and Satan working in league, violating God's laws. The things that we see, the four horsemen of Revelation, we see, famine and armies moving and starvation and disease and all that. God's not causing it. God just knows it's coming, and he tells us it's coming, and he warns us it's coming, but he didn't cause it. And Carl knows this. I'm not necessarily, saying this to Carl. I'm just pointing out to those people out there who don't understand suffering. These four horsemen of the apocalypse and all these things that are going to happen from the book of Revelation, God's not causing them. Now, there is some suffering that's caused by God when Jesus returns and the nations of the world all say, we're not going to submit to him, and then they fight him, and then there's this big battle of Armageddon, and Jesus wins, and a bunch of people die. God causes that because mankind is still rebelling at that point, and that's the only way, apparently, God can make people understand Jesus is going to rule as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So this suffering that's in the world today, and it's going to come all the way up until Armageddon, this is all man-made suffering. And people got to stop blaming God. And again, I'm not saying Carl did. No. I'm saying there are people out there, and this just provoked the thought what Carl said. They got to quit blaming God and acknowledge that all this suffering is due to man and Satan working together in league in their rejection of God.
Okay, Richard Maxwell has a clarification. He said he misunderstood what you said. He thought you were talking about people that got mad at Jesus for saying he was before Abraham. So it's clarification. So I guess you guys are all on the same page.
Okay.
Diane Webb says we don't want to suffer the tribulation, but many of us really didn't want labor pains either. When a new child is born, I know none of the men did. When a new
but
child
I had a kidney stone once.
yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I didn't have one, so I can't compare the two. When a new child is born, the suffering is forgotten and the rejoicing begins. Tribulation will be the same. That is probably true, but I will say, Diane, that's why a lot of people take drugs before they have labor.
Yeah.
And so I don't, I'm not asking for drugs, and I'm not asking to be flown to a place of safety. I'm just saying, if there's any way that that Jesus can return without that, it'd be great. And last night we talked about how we talked about end times a lot, and Trudy's comment here on YouTube reminded me of that. She said, "When he is ready to return, I am ready." For people our age, and even young people, you never know. You're just a heartbeat away, a car wreck, disaster of some sort away from dying. Anybody is,
Mm-hmm.
but our time. Our tribulation, our time may be over. It may be a few years ahead through, cancer or some other suffering, and we may be gone long before the tribulation comes. Yeah. So that might not even be something we suffer, and Jesus' return will be the next second for us. So
I want to go back to Diane's point. She makes a really good conceptual idea about after a baby's born, it's all forgotten. Mm-hmm. While she's screaming and cussing out her husband during the delivery and blaming him and saying, "This is all your fault. I'm never having a kid again."
You watch too much TV.
Yeah, okay. No, my sisters actually did that.
Did they really?
Yeah, they told me that they would cuss out their husbands and saying, "We're never going to do this again."
Oh.
But then after they have the baby, they can't wait to have another one. They love the baby so much. And so Diane brings up a really good point about that. And we are so myopic. We are so close to the situation, we can't look back and see that this 6,000 years of suffering that man and Satan have created, while they are horrible, horrible years of suffering, and shouldn't have happened, but they're here. Once we get into the kingdom of God, that's going to be forgotten.
True.
And every century and every millennium as we go into the kingdom of God, that stuff's going to become even more and more of a distant memory. And as we live on into eternity, I sometimes wonder how much we're going to really, really remember of all the bad things that went on. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for us to grasp that because we have finite minds, and this is an infinite concept that we're talking about, the eternity of the kingdom of God. It's hard for us to grasp that. And I'm not suggesting I've got a grasp on it. I'm saying that I'm just as carnal as the next guy, and I don't get it, but I think I kind of get the idea from the scriptures. Maybe we need to have a sermon on this, that the more we get into the kingdom of God in eternity, the less all the bad stuff that we experience is going to be remembered. It's going to be moved further and further back in time.
Sure, because why would we want to remember it? And remember, God has perfect forgetfulness. He has a perfect memory and also perfect forgetfulness because he doesn't remember our sins.
Right.
He removes them from us and remembers them no more.
Yeah.
So why would I want to remember my mother suffering with cancer or my father suffering with cancer? Or anything in the future that I might go through or my kids might go through, or some more horrible things that people have seen. Why would people want to remember their war experiences, losing buddies, a dead child, a stillborn child? Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to want to remember that, and I'm hoping and I believe that we will have that same ability to have perfect forgetfulness and not remember that.
Yeah, good point.
And I'm one who believes that there won't be many who ultimately deny God and refuse to obey and end up in the lake of fire. But we wouldn't want, if any of those people are related to us, or we know them, or we witness it, we wouldn't want to remember that either.
Exactly.
That they rejected God in that way. So,
good comment. Thank you, Diane.
A couple more things, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. So Richard Maxwell says, just want to hear the words, good and faithful servant, and no more tears or sorrow. That's one of my favorite scriptures as well. There were no more tears or sorrow, crying.
Two great scriptures. One is no more tears and sorrows, and the other is, well done, my good and faithful servant. We all want to hear that, don't we?
That's right.
And even though we don't live perfectly, we give it our best shot. We repent when we make a mistake. We repent when we sin. We acknowledge that sin is transgression of the law. We do our best. But still, in the end, it's our prayer that God's going to be merciful, and and we've got enough faith to believe that He's going to say, well done, my good and faithful servant. We're all looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, and Mimi says, I look forward to seeing my daughter, and so many have gone on before. Praise Him for the hope that we have to see so many we loved. And I think that's an excellent way to shut it down.
All right. We look forward to seeing people who are no longer with us, and that's
people we've lost in this life.
And this is a very serious thing, but it's going to be also a very enjoyable thing.
That's right.
And I think when we see them, we're going to start laughing. And I don't want to make light of the resurrection, but I got to say this. I am looking forward to the resurrection of Harpo Marx, the comedian. I want to see how he does that thing with his hat. He has this hilarious trick he does with his hat. I want to ask Harpo Marx how you did that with your hat. Because at the resurrection, we're going to be weeping with gladness. I understand it's going to be a very serious thing. But then there's going to come a time when we're going to start laughing. And sometimes I don't think we're going to be able to stop laughing because we're so happy at what is going on. And one of the things that's going to make me laugh is when I ask Harpo Marx, how did you do that trick with the hat?
Well, I have not exactly the same, but it's, speaking of the laughter thing that I think of, my dad, he used to, whenever he saw his mom, he would actually pick her up and swing her around, like pick her up by the waist and swing her around and put her down. That was how he greeted her. And I remember seeing him do that. And she would also always laugh uproariously and, chastise him and everything.
And scream,
And when she passed away, which was after him, he died of cancer years before she died, I thought, in both of their next instances, there'll be Jesus, and she'll be resurrected. She was not of the faith. She would be resurrected, I believe, in the second resurrection after the 1,000 years. But she will see him, and I picture him. I'm going to tear up. The first thing, being there when she comes back and saying, lifting her up and swinging her around.
And she's going to scream, and it's going to be wonderful.
And she's going to be so happy to see him.
Yep. Okay, do you have anything else in the chat room? If not, we're going to close with prayer.
Nope.
Okay, we want to thank Gary Gibbons for the great things that he did.
The sound and the announcing. Such a great voice.
Yes, and everybody reminds me what a great voice Gary has, and that I do not have Gary's voice. I understand that. Okay, but the intro that he put together with the music and the graphics and the outro and the this thing here, the slide,
scripture and the slide,
the official slide of the program put together by Gary. So thank you so much. And this was fun, and we look forward.
Let's do it again in a month.
Let's do it in a month. What do you
good idea.
Will you be there?
We planned it.
Let's do it again. In the meantime, we've got the Lord's Supper Passover coming this week, and praise God that we're going to be doing it, and may God bless you as you, in your obedience, observe this special occasion. It's a time of sober reflection, but it's also a time of rejoicing. So we hope that you will enjoy your Lord's Supper, Passover, whatever you call it, whatever day that you choose to keep it on. And we're not here to debate that tonight. We're here to just say, praise God that you're doing it, and we hope that God will bless you.
Mm-hmm. All right, ready?
And we'll be back on May 3rd, Friday night, for Start Our Sabbath. So we hope that you'll
May 3rd.
May 3rd. And then probably the day after, we might do another Remember the Sabbath.
Yeah, we need to settle on a day so we can start telling people.
Yep. Okay. All right. Let's close with prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you so much that we can assemble on the Sabbath and do things like look forward to your kingdom that's coming to the earth where Jesus will rule. We so look forward to that, Father, when we can be healed of our illnesses, we can be spiritually healed of our sins, when people who are suffering throughout the whole world are going to be losing that suffering, and they're going to be fed, and they're going to be given a warm bed and hot water and clean drinking water, things that they don't have at this time. We thank you that Jesus is going to provide that. We praise you and thank you, Father, for that day that's coming. This is what we live for every day. And we say to you, Father, thy kingdom come. We do not want it postponed. We want it here as quickly as possible. So thank you for this opportunity that we have had today to talk about Jesus' return, which is in the forefront of our minds. So now we ask for your blessing on these people who have assembled with us. We ask your special guidance and direction on them, their protection, and your mercy on them at all times. So we give you praise and thanks. We ask all these things and give you our gratitude, our worship, and our obedience. We do it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right, so you had some Sabbath keeping beforehand. You got some Sabbath keeping now. So go out and have a good Sabbath for the rest of the day.
Have a good Sabbath for the rest of the day. All right, I'm going to see if I can get over there and turn the thing off and post it.
Okay.
Let's see if I still remember how to do that.
And I'm just going to sit here and wait for you to do it.
And smile at the camera. Let's do a zoom in close up on Nancy first so everybody can see her. They're tired of looking at me. And let's see if I can press the button.
Thanks for joining us.